All right, for the rest of us, we're going to be in Ephesians chapter 2. So flip on over to Ephesians chapter 2. Good to see all of you guys today. What a privilege it is to be with you guys. All right. Amen. Good singing this morning. That is awesome. There are few things I enjoy more than lifting my voice with other Christians and believers in praising Jesus. Ephesians chapter 2 is where we're going to be. We're a portable church, so thank you guys for bearing with us as we shuffle and as we pass things around and along, including babies. But we're going to be in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 through 18 is kind of the goal, and we'll see where things lead. But have any of you guys ever tried to do a good deed or a kind deed or just something that was awesome, but as you're doing this, a problem was exposed? Just as an example, it's kind of silly, I guess. You go to wash your car, and you need to wash your car, and as you're wiping all the dirt off, you find all these scratches that weren't there before. Have you ever seen that before? Has that ever happened? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, this idea of you're doing something good, you're doing something very helpful, and in doing so, it actually reveals a problem. It actually reveals, I think in our case today, the true nature of people is where we're headed. And we're actually going to look at this morning, where Jesus shows up on the scene. All right, he did in verse 13 of chapter 2, and then he's going to do some incredible, incredible things for Christians. And in doing so, he is actually going to expose the human nature. He's going to expose us, our problems, our needs. And so this is kind of where we're headed this morning. But except Jesus, in the way he deals with human needs, it's not temporary, it's not these man-made solutions. Jesus offers permanent, identity-changing solutions. He offers himself. And so this is where we're going to be going this morning. Hopefully we'll have enough time to walk through some of these big ideas. There is some huge stuff going on here in these verses. But why don't I read them? And then we'll dive into it. It says this, talking about Jesus. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And he came and preached peace to you who are far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. Father, I ask that you just give clarity of thought and mind this morning, that you would open our hearts up to what your word has for us. Lord, would you get all the credit and all the glory here at Gospel Life this morning. So as we dive in, we're going to see here a few things that Jesus acts out. We're going to see Jesus working. We're going to see Jesus doing huge, monumental, history-shaking, life-changing things, all right? It starts off kind of simple, though. In the first part of verse 14, he says, for he himself is our peace. This is where we see Jesus' actions exposing our need. All right, so Jesus is our peace. And Jesus came and he gives us peace, which reveals something about us, that we have a need for peace, that we have a tendency to wander and to run from peace, to find anything that we think looks good or attractive and throw ourselves at it. And Jesus comes and he is our peace. So there's a statement made here. He's our peace. I think there's two parts to this peace. We've got to back up to last week. I know everyone wasn't here last week, but we talked about this relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles. And we talked about this strained relationship, a stressed relationship that goes decades, centuries back, where these guys are always at odds. They're always fighting, not infighting because they're not in the same party. They're always fighting one another. There's this tension, there's just this rub, this rivalry that we see between these two parties. In verse 13, we see Jesus shows up on the scene, and he says, now in Christ you were once far off, have been brought near by the blood of Jesus. So he shows up on the scene, and now he's going to deal with this strained relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles. He's going to deal with this, but there's this hostility there between the two groups. And there's two aspects to this idea of peace. One is, peace is a lack of hostility, and the other is a mutual friendship. Okay? There's just two aspects to this relational peace that we see here. Jesus is our peace. Paul is writing this, he's talking about Jews and Gentiles both. And now he is our collectively he's our peace. So something had to happen for them to be peace, to have this Jesus in common. This is what we're going to talk about. But for one, we're going to see Jesus removes that hostility, and he actually gives them this acceptance, this mutual friendship, but that reveals that there is hostility there. There's something going on here where people they're just at odds, and there's this hatred that has to be removed. And Jesus shows up and he actually removes that. You got to think about peace, though. Peace, think of it in this way: two countries, two nations, they may not be at war, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're friends either, right? So the hostility might not be there, but that doesn't mean that their friendship is there either. All right, and so we can trace this all the way back to Jews and Gentiles, where there were times in their history where they weren't fighting, they weren't warring, but they weren't friends either. And I think it could work in a strange way, I guess, vice versa. But we see these two aspects here, that Jesus shows up on the scene, and he is what makes possible the lack of hostility, that hostility to be removed, and he introduces this friendship. He makes the hatred disappear. He's the one that unites them together. This is why Paul says it's our peace. It's possessed by all believers everywhere, Jew or Gentile, any Christian. Jesus shows up, introduces peace now, all right? So he makes this statement, and this is where we're starting, and you're probably thinking in your mind that doesn't fully explain it. It doesn't if we just left it there, but it does continue to go, all right? So he makes this incredible statement that Jesus is our peace, Jew and Gentile. We talked about this last week. Who is a Gentile? Anyone who's not a Jew, so raise your hand if you're a Gentile. All right, that's us, right? That's pretty much everyone here. So he is bringing Jew and Gentile / anyone else together, all right? Where there is a lack of hatred and there is friendship. All right, so he's our peace. Then he goes on to say, he has made us both one. Still talking about Jesus here. He has made us both one. Paul's still referring to the Jews and the Gentiles. This century-old infighting, this like Hatfields and McCoy kind of stuff. This is going on between Jews and Gentiles, and Jesus makes them both one. All right, so we got to remember from last week, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal for Gentiles now to be part of the blessings of being a Jew. And he actually removes the privileges of the Jews originally had from the Old Testament and tracing forward. He removes that to everyone now. All right, so this is a big deal when he makes us both one. And that's in past tense, guys. You see that? Where Jesus has made, in the past, us both one. This is referring to a specific act in history. This is referring to something that Jesus did on the cross. This is referring back to 2,000 years ago from our perspective, where Jesus, he shows up on this planet, he lives a perfect life, he gives himself to die as a ransom for many on the cross, and changes the trajectory of the future. This is how he introduces peace. For one, is he has made us both one. There's two aspects to this. He made this happen on the cross. If there is no Jesus, there is no Jew and Gentile gathering as friends. If there is no Jesus, there's no reconciliation between those relationships. But there is a Jesus, and he's made those two one. He's brought those people together. We wouldn't have common ground if we didn't have Jesus. They'd still be at odds. They'd still be hating one another. There would still be immense animosity between one another if Jesus never came. You guys might already start to be thinking, this kind of sounds like life now. This kind of sounds like my life between other Christians. This kind of sounds like the world that I live in. And maybe it's not hatred and animosity from one Christian to the other. But you know what? Jesus is still alive and well. He goes on to say this: in order to see how good the solution is, I'm sorry, I'm missing the verse here. Who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. If you guys have your Bibles, I'm still in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. He himself is our peace, who has made us both one, has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. All right, so now is where he's starting to get a little clearer, where Paul is writing this message from prison. He's starting to funnel this a little closer and closer to reality, and he's talking big things. Jesus is our peace. He's made us both one. And how has he done that? He's broken down this wall of hostility. You might have a different translation that calls it something else, some partition, a division, but it's a dividing wall of hostility. And this is where we started out at the beginning. We said in order to see how good the good is, we've got to see how bad the bad is. All right, there's something about this good message of Jesus being our peace that exposes our need for it. And our tendency to wander away from it. All right, so here we see Paul introduces another problem, all right? Start off by saying, Jesus is peace. You guys don't have peace. You've got this infighting, you've got this terrible relationship. Jesus offers this. And then he says, you are both one. That's because you were previously not one. You were enemies. You were running from each other. You hated one another. So you need Jesus to solve this. Now we see another problem, this dividing wall of hostility. Before we break that down, I think we've got to see, though, there's a big problem that's totally relatable to us. And I think it's this problem of individualism, or we could say it in the church's context, this idea of disunity. There's this disunity. For Jesus to bring two people together, two parties together, there has to be some acknowledgement that they aren't together, that they're disunified. That they're pulled apart, they're split apart. And for Jesus to bring them together, that shows something about our heart. That we have a tendency to be disunified. And if Jesus never showed up on the scene in your heart, that's where things go. It's disunity. This is a huge, huge deal, this idea of unity. And it is all laced through the entire Bible, is this idea of unity. And here we see it on a macro level where Jews and Gentiles now are being invited into the same relationship. This is huge unity. This is immensely powerful. This is what I mean by history shaking. Where the Hatfields and the McCoys finally do have to get together, and they're brought together because of this man Jesus. So what's the big deal about unity then? Well, think about it. What if your house where you live, what if your home isn't unified? You can immediately think of repercussions. You can immediately think of where that goes wrong. I think one like the goofier illustrations is when the child goes to one spouse and says, hey, can I do this? And that spouse says, no. And you're hoping, the child is hoping that mom and dad aren't unified. And so he goes to the other spouse, she goes to the other spouse and says, can I do this? And they say, yes. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Anybody lived that before? All right, Mike's very emphatic, like, yep, my daughter just did that this week, kind of thing. Yeah, so this is a goofy illustration, but this has ramifications that aren't just on you, and they are, but they also extend to your family if you've got a family. These extend then not just the home life, but what if work? What if where you work is disunified? What if where you go to punch in the clock and your bosses, none of them ever get along? None of your supervisors know exactly how to direct you. Maybe you're the supervisor and you're currently experiencing disunity. You immediately see how that plays out. You immediately see the ramifications of being disunified, of people not allowing themselves to come together as a team and work for the betterment of everyone. You see how this unity is a massive problem. If we were to zoom out and we were to look at just our country, what if our country's disunified? For one, it is. All right, for one, right now we are experiencing currently the aftermath of disunity. And in a perfect world, it would be awesome if we all just kind of got along and we could all just be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Where do I sign? And we all just kind of like, but that's not reality. That is so far from reality for all of us to be unified, it doesn't make any sense. And it's probably not going to happen. However, what we have to change in our thinking is, I saw this incredible, article or video this morning of this lady giving her testimony. And she was just going through a lot in life, and she said that she had to retrain the way she thinks to not think, what if? And if we think, what if, then we prepare for the worst, right? If we are always constantly thinking, what if this happens, then we're constantly in a state of frenzy, we're constantly concerned, we're constantly worried. And this lady said, I had to change my mind from thinking, what if, to changing, even if. Even if this happens. Even if this happens, Jesus. Even if not, what if? Because it just might. And this woman is somebody who's, I gets the whole story, but she couldn't use her arms for periods of time, some paralytic, I don't know, not draw, that's mechanics terminology, that's terrible, that's totally not what we're talking about. Some sort of like, she just doesn't move properly. What would that be? Doesn't matter. This woman is one that could truly be like, well, what if this happens? And it did happen. What if my arms stopped working? They did stop working. What if? And she had to go from thinking, what if, to even if this happens, Jesus. He promises to be with me. He's our peace. He's our peace. So this is awesome. And this is something that we see, though, is this disunity we see everywhere. Everywhere we go, literally. It affects all of us. It affects all of who you are. What about this, though? What happens when the church isn't unified? What if the church is experiencing disunity? How does that work? I think this is where maybe the worst issue lies. The whole mission of the church is at stake. The church is not, I'm talking to you guys here, us, if we aren't unified in Jesus, our whole mission is at stake. Our whole, one of the best parts of the church is the togetherness, right? One of the teamwork, the collaboration. We're all working together to lift the name of Jesus, and we can do more together kind of stuff. We're putting that all at stake when this individualism sneaks into the church and starts to fracture our unity and starts to take where our mindset and our perspective and our eyesight that should be focused on Jesus, and then that starts to bleed into everything. Before we know it, we've got factions in our church, we've got cliques, we've got splits coming up on the horizon, we've got all sorts of issues that just undermine the church. And especially what happens when we let individualism sneak into the church is that starts to get people on their little pet things. And that's probably not, or maybe not, the gospel. It's not the cross, the message of the redeeming Savior. And so what happens is they start to find these little like pet thoughts or doctrines or something, and they start to steal some of the church's resources and some of the church's energy, and we're pouring them in the wrong things. And here Jesus says, no, Jesus is our peace. Jesus truly is the solution. And that doesn't just mean that's not an excuse to just walk into some disunified situation and be like, Jesus. Yep. Let's just, the answer is Jesus. If we want to hear that, we go into the kids' classroom and we'd ask them any questions and they'd say, yes, the answer is Jesus. And they don't know exactly what that means. They don't know the ramifications. This isn't just a free-for-all whenever there's unity in the home to just be like, Jesus. This is not what we're talking about. We are talking about getting to know Jesus that can permeate all of your life. And what we are talking about is a peace that comes from dwelling in harmony and in unity with Jesus first. And what happens with that is Jesus takes a soul and a heart that is given to himself, and he starts to create that unity from you, and that starts to spread, and people start to understand, man, it really is about Jesus. And that unity comes from all staring at him, guys, all worshiping him, every knee bowed before him. So it starts with a good relationship with Jesus, and then it's going to flow into a relationship with one another, with our church. And when we are disunified, we are undermining ourselves. We are undermining the mission of the church to lift high the cross, to display the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think that brings up another issue, guys. Do you care? Do you care about the gospel of Jesus Christ? The person of Jesus Christ who gave his life for you. Not so you could just live a comfortable, perfect, ducks in a row life, but so that you could live a life trusting, totally reliant, given to Jesus and saying, here I am, send me, whatever it takes, do it. Here I am. Do you even care about the gospel to begin with? Let's start there. Let's run to Jesus first. Let's run to Jesus, walk together. A little bit of a tangent, but this is what we see here in this passage is Jesus is doing incredible things for all of history. And underlying that is, you see a loving God who takes pity on people who just got issues, and we tend to just run from him. We mentioned this dividing wall of hostility. At the end of verse 14 there, he has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. There are three main perspectives that people think about this. What is the dividing wall of hostility? And this is where I enjoy teaching through this stuff, because this is kind of like Christianese. This is Christian words where people just glance over and they don't really think about this. But there's some power here, okay? This dividing wall of hostility, for one, the one perspective is, some people think this actually refers to the 4.5-foot wall in the temple in Jerusalem at the time of Paul writing this, and where it refers to a physical wall of hostility. And actually at the temple, that wall, that 4.5-foot wall, was truly what segregated Jews from Gentiles, where the Jews would go do their business, where the Gentiles would go do their business. And a Jew was actually liable to be killed if they brought a Gentile with them. On that actual wall, it's inscribed this: "No Gentile may enter within the barricade which surrounds the sanctuary and enclosure. Anyone who is caught doing so will have himself to blame for his ensuing death." All right, so this dividing wall of hostility is not messing around. You bring the wrong people across the barricade, you die, and they're saying in that, not our fault, it's yours. So you don't want to disobey the dividing wall in the temple there. However, there's no direct reference in this passage that that's actually the case. And at this time in history, this book is written about 66, 68 AD, the dividing wall in the temple was still standing. All right? So that doesn't make any sense if Paul's saying, Jesus took down this wall, and then someone's coming behind me like, hey, actually, Paul is still standing, so what exactly are you talking about? So that's not what's going on here. This isn't the actual physical wall of hostility, because it's still not broken down. A second thing that people mainly think is that it refers to maybe the curtain in the temple. In the temple where between the holy place and the Holy of Holies, where only the priests could go, pretty much once a year. Some people think it's referring to that curtain, but that doesn't make sense either, because that's a curtain and not a wall. So that just makes sense in that very fact. But also, the picture of the priest going into the Holy of Holies does not actually match up with what's going on in Ephesians here. All right, so the priest would go into the curtain on behalf of the Jews. And the Jews weren't even allowed to get in there, though, all right? So there's this dividing there that's even where Jews are excluded. All right, so that doesn't make sense where, in this case, it's a Jew versus Gentile thing. It's not a Jew versus priest or Jew versus Holy of Holies thing. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the third perspective, which does make sense, is that the wall here is metaphorical for the Mosaic law, where the Bible tells us that the wall is a fence around the law. This law that was given to Moses to govern the people of Israel, where this is referring to ceremonial laws, the civil laws. This is referring to even the moral law that of the Mosaic nature that is now here demolished, that is now here broken down. So this is, the Mosaic law was actually something that did divide Jews from Gentiles. All right, this is part of the privileges and the blessings of being a Jew. God gave them many promises, many things to come, but he also gave them many commands. He gave them a lot of specific commands. A lot of my favorite one that I always use is you can't wear essentially cotton and polyester at the same time. When you have to put your tents in a certain you have to put your tents in a certain manner around the temple. You have to pretty much cross all your I's and dot all your I's and cross all your T's. Everything had to be just right when it came to the Mosaic law that the people of Israel were governed by. And that, as we see here and as we see all over Scripture, the law is actually what creates that hostility between the Jews and the Gentiles. And the law was given there for the Jews to, like I said, to govern them, to protect them even from falling into a world that's run by the devil. The law was given for very good things, and in and of itself, the law was not bad. But the Jews, in their flesh, started to take what they had, and they started to view themselves as this elite, superior crowd, because we have the oracles of God. We have the very commands of God. and you guys, you pigs, you Gentiles, you don't. And so they're taking what was supposed to be a good thing, and they are turning it, they're misusing it, they're abusing it to create this tension between the two groups. And in our context here, we actually see 2-3 verses earlier, the problem in mind was the circumcision. The Jews were and the Gentiles weren't, and they're trying to kind of like parade it over the Gentiles. We're better than you. We have the mark of Abraham. We have the mark of God. And their pride and their arrogance is sneaking up onto the scene and creating this hostility. All right, so now we're starting to see, and this is what makes sense. If that dividing wall of hostility is the Mosaic law, that is the root. And we're starting to see here, this is actually what is pulling these two parties apart, is the Jews are abusing the law that they were given and creating this immense tension between the Jews and the Gentiles. So it does make good sense to think that this wall of partition wasn't the literal wall, but it's the metaphorical wall that divided Jews and Gentiles, being the Mosaic law. It talks about hostility here. It was a wall of hostility. This is what I meant by this is the source of hostility. Is the law. This is where that mindset of I'm better than you is coming from. It's the law. We can pick anything in life. Anything that divides, right? And the division is the symptom. The pulling apart, the relational split, that's a symptom of a root problem. And there's a root somewhere. And normally in our cases, it's an idol of some sort that we're worshiping, not like actual physical idol. I go into Jim's house and, whoa, Jim, what are you doing on all fours, man? That is an idol. You don't worship. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about idols. Anything that takes the place, that takes your worship, that takes your affection from God. This is an idol. And normally in humans' perspective, we put all these idols there. Was it Lewis who says we're just idol factories? This is just kind of what we do. But here, that's the source. You've got to trace it down to that idol. You've got to trace it down to that one thing that you're taking out of perspective, that one thing that's turning into pride in your life and affecting your relationship. So what's your idol? And here we see Jews and Gentiles, we see Hatfield and McCoy's kind of stuff, where they are separated for centuries because of this law that one party had and one didn't. And the party that had it, they weren't good winners, they were sore losers. And they're the ones who say, we've got this, ha ha ha, you don't. What's that thing in your life? What's that thing in your life that's causing tension, that's dividing people? What are you worshiping that's not Jesus, that's not the cross? What is it that's pulling you apart from other people? I can tell you what, if it's another Christian, you are in the wrong. If there's anger and there's bitterness between you and another Christian, you're in the wrong. Jesus is your peace. This is what we see here, that wall of hostility, that law being broken down, and those two parties coming together because of Jesus. This is how it's to work. Is people coming to Jesus. And once again, I'm not just saying this is just that generic blanket you can throw on things and say Jesus. No, there are times and there are situations and scenarios where you've got to dig deeper, but you've got to be grounded and rooted, and you've got to be led by what you know about Jesus. So it all goes down to him. But this is awesome because Jesus broke down that wall of hostility. And then he goes on to say in verse 15, he says, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. Once again, a lot of Christianese going on here, a lot of words that we don't really use, so let's talk about it a little bit. He's still referring to the whole Mosaic law here. He's still referring to that law that consists of commandments. Now he said the law of commandments expressed. He's just talking about this is a hefty law that's got a lot of specifics to it. It's got a lot of details to this law. He's still referring to this in decrees or ordinances. He's just defining the nature of those commandments. That there's just a lot of them. All right, so this is he abolished the Mosaic law that's filled with a lot of specific commands, the ones that are expressed in ordinances, that are expressed in decrees. So still talking about the Mosaic law, but what's going on here, that word abolish, all right, this is the action. This is the verb here. This is to render something inoperative. To render something inoperative. What do I mean by that? Somebody help me out here. Let's break Ben's loud talking by someone else's voice. When we say rendering something inoperative, what does that mean?
Make it unable to work.
Makes it unable to work. Exactly. Making something unable to work. In this case, Jesus takes the law that the Jews are abusing and he makes it unable to work. He says, this is not how it's going to be anymore. I'm on the scene. I'm here. We know from Romans 10:4 that Jesus is the end of the whole law for Christians. From Galatians 3:25, we know that we as believers, we are no longer under that master, under that teacher, that pedagogue. From Romans 7:1-6, we know that as Christians, we've actually died to that law. We are not under the law of the Mosaic law of the ceremonial stuff, the civil stuff, the social stuff. We're not under that. That is abolished. That is rendered inoperative. That is turned off by Jesus himself. So if that's the case, though, and that's like the majority of the Old Testament that's now abolished, that then begs the question, why is the Old Testament important? Why is the Old Testament important then if the Mosaic law, the law that governed the Israelites, why is that important? Especially if the Old Testament is essentially a history of the Jews, a history of the Israelites. So why is it still important then? I think we could go on and on about the importance of the Old Testament. It's definitely still a thing. We still obey the principles that the Old Testament teaches. I think in a trite way of saying it, so maybe not the best, but maybe in a way that does relay this, it's the spirit of that law and not the letter of that law. It's the principles that underlie the teachings and the illustrations of the Old Testament that we actually do obey. We also obey, obviously, the ones that are reiterated in the New Testament. So any of the Old Testament that Jesus himself or that Paul or that they bring up again in the New Testament, then that obviously means we're gonna still adhere to those things. It's in the New Covenant. We also have the Old Testament to help us understand the New Testament. If we take out the Old Testament, the New Testament, it makes sense, but not complete sense. And it definitely doesn't enrich the story as much as it does with the Old Testament. It definitely doesn't add that undergirth to it that really props up and supports everything that the New Testament is. But what we do know is that we are no longer under the Mosaic law, the cotton and polyester stuff, putting your tents in the right spot stuff. We are not under that. That is not where Jesus has taken us. We are under a new covenant is what it's called, where the old covenant has been done away with. It's not our modus operandi anymore. It's not that. Christ fulfilled that law, and he's the one who renders it unoperative, and that applies to both Gentiles and Jewish Christians. Anyone in Jesus, that's the solution. So kind of to recap this, Harold Hoehner says, I think the best thing, he says, Christ has destroyed the symptom, that is the enmity between Jews and Gentiles, by making inoperative the root or cause, namely the law of commandments and ordinances. Hence, the nullification of the Mosaic law has great significance for Jews and Gentiles in Jesus. It's no longer our modus operandi. It is turned off. It's not destroyed, though, and that's something that I do want to say. It's not destroyed. And this is what I mean. The Old Testament's still there. It still has immense value. It puts a lot of color in the picture. It really is one of those things that we don't just entirely write it off. No, dig into it. Get to know what's going on and see the principles that God's trying to lay before us in his word. That is still his inspired word of God. So we're not just going to pass it on. It's not destroyed. It's just abolished. It's just rendered inoperative. You can still go to a junkyard and see broken cars. Not that the Old Testament's a broken car. Should have never said that. Let's move on. So we keep going here in the passage where we see that Jesus might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace. Jesus created in himself one new man in place of the two. All right, so he's obviously talking about Jews and Gentiles that were segregated, that were so obviously different entities. And he says, nope, not anymore. He brings those together and creates a new organism. He creates a new entity that is no longer Jewish nor Gentile. This is awesome because this is us, guys. This is where Jesus gets those two families, those two groups that were fully rejecting one another. And he says, you know what? Jesus is your level playing ground. Jesus is your common ground. Jesus now creates a new organism called Christians, called believers. This leads into the church. This is a new family where two become one. And this is obviously metaphorical. He's not taking two men and making one new man. That's not what's going on here. He's creating a new family that fully accepts one another because they have been accepted by Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5:17, if any person be in Christ, he's a new creature. Galatians 6:15, for neither is circumcision anything nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. Ephesians 4:24 says to put on the new person. This is a whole new race that's formed. It's a whole new race that's actually raceless. The church, Christians, the family of Jesus. And Jesus abolishes that law, and he tears down that dividing wall that separates people by his blood on the cross. And he creates this new entity of Christians. Anyone, all who believe, anyone may come to Jesus, and they are put into the family of Christ. This is a beautiful, beautiful picture where Jesus just destroys the animosity, destroys the hate by an immense act of love. It says, come to me, and anyone can come, and anyone is family. And this is why I said earlier, that hatred that you have towards another Christian, maybe that hatred, that animosity, that bitterness that you are directing at another Christian, you are in the wrong. It is not truthful living. If you are reconciled in Jesus, so you guys have got to find where that is. You've got to find how you can get there, and you've got to give God glory by getting there. Goes on to say, so making peace. This explains all this. That's what explains that statement earlier, that Jesus is our peace. This is what it means here. He removed the hostility and he replaced it with friendship. Remember that the lack of peace or hostility means hatred and non-friendship. Now Jesus is our peace by removing the idols that created that disunity, the things that drove people away. He gets rid of them entirely. And he makes peace. Jesus has made your peace. So we've got to realize it and we've got to live it. Goes on to say, though, that he might reconcile us both to God. Reconcile is that idea of restoring something, reconciling. And he talks about reconciling them in one body. So now when he says body there, he's referring now to that new entity that he created as Christians. And he's highlighting this tension in humans and God, and where that one body's got to be reconciled to God. And so now what he shows us is that there were two groups of people, Jews and Gentiles, not reconciled, but Jesus shows up on the scene, reconciles, restores that relationship. They are friends, they got cool, and then he starts to show us that there's also a reconciliation that happens between humans and God. And once again, it's the same solution. Jesus shows up on the scene, and he's the one that reconciles then humans to God. He is the one that gives us access to God, and that's exactly verse 18 where we're headed. If we zoom there, if we fast forward there, this is awesome. Jesus comes, in verse 17, he proclaims, he preaches, he gospels peace. He preached peace to you who are far off and peace to those who are near. All right, so once again, now we saw in verses 14 through 16 the announcement of peace, the explanation of peace, all right? And now here we see Jesus, the peace, all right? And we see Jesus coming. He preached peace to you far off and peace to those who are near. Why? And that's that tension between humans and God. That's that tension that sin enters this world, and sin is what takes you from God. Well, this goes all the way back to Grandpa Adam and Grandma Eve. This goes all the way back then where we saw sin entering the world, and they're experiencing this perfect harmony, this perfect union with God. Sin enters, and it fractures that union. It takes away that peace, that harmony. And because of that, sin now is a huge issue for everyone to come. And this is what Paul's referring to. This is sin. This is what causes us, what gives us, necessitates restoration. Sin destroys. Sin unchecked, sin unforgiven takes you ultimately to hell. And this is what we see here. And this is why Paul is saying, Jesus, he is your relational solution, and he is your Godward solution. He's your horizontal and your vertical solution. It is Jesus. Jesus is the one who forgives sin. And this refers back to the cross 2,000 years ago where he killed it. He killed that macro hostility. He killed it. Jesus came and he proclaimed peace to the Gentiles and to the Jews, to everyone. The peace that Jesus preached was the peace that Jesus accomplished. If there is no Jesus on the cross, there is no peace. There is no relational peace. There is no Godward-focused peace. There is no peace without Jesus. Think about it this way. People who don't know Christ, they don't actually have peace. People who are not found in Jesus Christ don't have peace. They are trying to come up with man-made remedies to kind of prolong their comfort. They're coming up with man-made thoughts to kind of avoid those idols that they're worshiping. They come up with anything to just kind of, what's the way it says? They come up with anything to quiet their conscience. Allow their conscience to subside and quiet that voice that's telling them about the God-shaped hole in them. This is huge. But in verse 18, though, we see the result of the peacemaking that Jesus gave. For through Jesus, we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. The message of peace, the result of that message is, in one word, access. Access to God. We briefly touched on this a few minutes ago, but in the Old Testament, the Jews, they did have access to God. They did have the temple where they could do certain things, and they had the priest who could go into the holies of holies once a year, and that was supposed to represent the access to God. But the Jewish access to God was through that priest. It's through him. And so they had a limited access in one way. And so when Jesus says this now to a Jewish reader, this makes complete sense. Now I have access to God. Me personally, I can go to God. I don't have to go through a priest. I don't have to go through someone else. I have one freedom to go to God. I have access to God. This is awesome. This is the peacemaking that Jesus gives. It represents a familiarity. It represents an approachability without contempt. Access to God. And when you go to God on the foundation, on the grounds, through the blood of Jesus, he will in no way cast you out. When you run to God and you are covered in the blood of Jesus, you are believing in Jesus, his Son, all are welcome. The grass, the playing field is leveled at the foot of the cross. This is really, really cool stuff. Jesus truly is our peace, guys. He broke down what separated the Jews and the Gentiles. He nullified the Mosaic Law. He creates this new race of Christians. He is our peace. Jesus is our peace, truly. We talk about how Jesus broke down what separated the Jews and Gentiles. Well, that's just our nature. And this is where we started off saying, Jesus' immense acts of love show us our need of a Savior. And so we need as humans to be unified with Jesus. And this is what, if we were left to ourselves without a Jesus Christ, then this is what's going to happen. And I think even this morning, some of you guys, your hearts are experiencing separation. You are building up some sort of wall in your own life where you don't want to let people in. Where I don't know if it's just about your personality or if it's about where your heart is. Maybe you're actually hiding something that you don't want people to see. You don't want them in. I don't know. But this is the human nature, is to just make our peace or make our own way. And he talks about nullifying the Mosaic Law. I think this This speaks to the human condition that we, as humans, we enjoy misusing. We abuse the actual intention that God has. And this is what we see here where the Jews took the law that was in and of itself something good, and they just absolutely abuse it. This is exactly what we do as humans, and it's called sin. Where whatever it is that God has given us in and of itself that is a beautiful thing, speech, intimacy in marriage, finances, things that we need, and things that God has a plan for, it's just our tendency to take those and misuse them. But guys, Jesus will take away the root problem and its symptoms. Run to Jesus. And then he creates this new race of Christians. I think that says something about our old race. He creates this new humanity, this new entity called Christians. That obviously says something about the way we used to be. The way we used to live without Jesus. Come to Jesus. All are welcome. All of us. And that old life, that old self, that leads to just, if you continue to wander and walk down that path, that old self just keeps leading to more self-centeredness, to more self-leading, to more self-helps. And it doesn't lead to Jesus. He creates this new entity of Christians where we run together, we walk together as a brotherhood, as a family, as fellow Christians. And that's where he's going in the next passage that we're going to look at in a few weeks. But then it says, Jesus is our peace. And the cost of our peace is great. The cost of our peace came at a high price for Jesus. The cost for Jesus to bring those far and near to the throne of God, the cost of Jesus to reconcile people to God was great. And at the cross, where his own blood was shed, where his own blood was poured out, he brings those far and near into one. Christian, tear down your walls. Love other Christians and be loved by other Christians. Get into this messy thing called the church. Get into this relationship that is now one. It is open for all. One and all. Come to the foot of Jesus. I beg you guys, Christians, maybe you're a Christian, you've already accepted Christ. If you haven't, please come to him today. But Christian, you're in. So stop acting like you're out. You're in. So make those relationships right. Get that communion with your brother back in restored harmony. Get those relationships back to where Jesus is the main thing. Get your heart focused on the cross. Get your heart focused on the peace that comes from Jesus. Guys, if you're here this morning, if you don't know Jesus, you don't know peace. And I ask you to come to know Jesus. Your heart craves peace, and it will only be found in Jesus. Christian, you're here this morning. I beg you, I plead with you, get it right. If you have some sort of hatred, animosity that would resemble Jews versus Gentiles, get that right. And maybe it's not on that level. That's one thing. And it probably isn't on that level, almost guaranteed. But it starts off small, and it starts to grow, and it starts to affect more and more, and it gets in your head, and your spouse's head, your kid's head, and it starts to affect everything very soon. If you don't go to Jesus now, at least on your end, at least on your heart, give it to Jesus. Tear down that wall. Jesus did. So I ask us all this morning to come to him, to love Jesus and embrace the peace that comes from a relationship with Jesus. Father in heaven, thanks so much for your love. Thank you for this beautiful picture of Ephesians. Lord, I ask that you would give our church that unity that comes from worshiping and following after and believing in Jesus. God, I ask that we would not be guilty of throwing up walls of separation and walls of hostility and things that divide us as a people. But God, would we be a church that pursues one another in love, that pursues reconciliation, that pursues harmony, that pursues everything that you died for. God, we give this to you. I ask that you would continue to grow our church, use our church, and that you would open our eyes and our hearts to the truths, the life-changing, history-altering truths of your Son. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. You guys are dismissed. Thanks for being with us today.